This is like a reunion to me because back in the 80s and 90s, I did a series for PBS, 100 shows called The New Explorers. And in doing that, I met a lot of the scientists that you will meet today. I was very much into it until it became difficult to get funding, both out of PBS and $2 million a year for a budget. So I said, well, does anybody else want me? Unfortunately, it led me to Murder and Mayhem for cold case files on A&E and investigative reports and American justice. But once a convert to conservation, always. So I bought a ranch in Kansas. I've got about 10,000 acres in conservation easement. And a little bit later, started a company of grass-fed beef, which was more difficult than I thought. And I had no business doing that, but it was rewarding. And if you come to Chicago, you can get some. And, you know, kind of wrapped it up. How I got to Anchorman, I don't know. I don't know. But to get it out of your system, you may be familiar, more familiar with that than anything else that I have done. There was a time before cable, when only men read the news. And in San Diego, that man was Ron Burgundy. But back to science. I have two goals. One, in the limited time that we have, to put as much information in your laps as possible. And we have the great ones to do that. So, may I introduce our first expert guest, Robert Stanton, former director of the National Park Service, a good friend of mine when I was on the board of the National Park Foundation. Bob. Good to see you. Bob is the Michael Jordan of the National Park Service and has all the answers. When I was there, I seem to remember that we were about $8 million in arrears for the national parks. And yet we all knew that they were the jewel in the crown of America, a great schoolhouse for conservation and just recreation for everyone else. What's the status now and conservation as you see it from your days?
Thank you, Bill. But let me first of all commend the organizing sponsors for this great summit. And secondly, to congratulate you on your continued leadership and commend you for your support of the nation's national park when you served as a member of the board of directors of the Park Foundation. The Park Service, as when you were a part of the foundation, was experiencing a significant backlog in infrastructure improvements, neighboring at that time between $7.5 to $8 billion. I think that number has grown to about $10 billion because new parks have been added that have some needs as well. I'm optimistic that there will be a continuing addressing of this concern by the administration, by Congress, and certainly the continued increase in philanthropy, donations from individuals and corporations, in-kind services as well as cash. I have to be realistic, though, that it will take a while to bring all the parks up to the highest standard because $8 to $10 billion is a lot of money. And about half of that would be allocated towards improving roads and bridges, recognizing that some of our road systems are over 120 to 130 years old. Witness Yosemite or Yellowstone. So it's a major effort, but I remain optimistic that those concerns will be addressed.
It's pretty basic what we need there.
It's
roads, facilities to stay. I feel as though I have just dived on Valens Reef and walked in the rainforest in that virtual reality booth of Conservation International down there. And you were talking about new technology.
Yes.
That will allow a walk in the forest from the Tetons or Yellowstone to be seen in the middle of Chicago or New York.
That is correct.
Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the problems that we had was how do we get especially minority students and young people into the parks?
Yes, yes. We are now a nation of, I believe, 317 million as indicated by the 2010 census. We are a very diverse society. We are highly urbanized, and unfortunately there are some citizens who have not had the opportunity to visit some of the larger parks. But in an attempt to address that, Bill, in the early 70s and continuing to the mid-70s, new parks were created within the urban environment. Take Gateway as an example in New York, Golden Gate in San Francisco, Chattahoochee in Atlanta, Cuyahoga between Akron and Cleveland, Santa Monica, Los Angeles. Parks in which young people, adults, their parents could literally walk to those parks, and they are to be maintained in the highest standards as well. But we would hope that while virtual reality is a way of introducing our diverse citizenry to parks, I'm a little biased, there's nothing like experiencing a park firsthand.
Nothing like reality.
Hey, I like that.
So reflect if you can. Reflect if you can, back over the years, and distill for us what can now be done.
Bill, let me put it in a context, and I would have to sort of personalize that with one who is at that tender age of 16. People want to add that up quickly. I've seen a lot of changes. I came from a different society than many of our people in the audience. For 24 years, I lived under the doctrine of separate but equal. And I will tell you there was nothing equal under those circumstances. So a lot of progress was made. And I remain optimistic that while we dealt with those social inadequacies, that we can deal with those as well in the environmental movement. What I have been pleased to see over some 40+ years being associated with the national parks and the Department of Interior, even though we may be confronted with some difficult economic times, some social unrest or what have you, there is a continuing love for the public lands, which are really our inherited treasures. Visitation continues to increase. Volunteerism continues to increase. There are over 200,000 individuals who volunteer daily with the National Park Service. Donation of property, donation of funds, corporate sponsorship, increased collaboration and cooperation, a more diverse workforce in terms of minorities and women. That all give me hope that all will be well, notwithstanding that there seems to be some time that we step back before we go forward. But I am very optimistic.
I'm glad to hear that. I always felt, and still do, that we need something of a Marshall Plan that takes branding, marketing,
yes,
a survey of the opportunities, and put it right in front of kids especially, in the classroom, because they will save us. And lots of money. But given the opportunity and, if you will, have it sold to NSC Johnson or the Tiffany and Company, they'll do it.
Yeah, I think so. You mentioned youth, that if I were to submit to a passion, it is the continuing responsibility, I think, that we share individually and collectively, that is to engage our young people in the stewardship of their heritage, which are our parks and fish and wildlife, national forests, state parks, and what have you. And Congress recognized this, interestingly enough, in 1970, which is a very important date to all of us who are participating in this summit, authorized what they call the Youth Conservation Corps, which authorized the Department of Interior and Agriculture to hire young people at the tender age of 15 through 18 to work in the parks and on other public lands during their traditional summer break, recognizing that we have a responsibility to develop the stewards that's going to take the area when we transition elsewhere. And I remain optimistic that the young people are going to do much better than we have done.
You know, you bring up, I mean, you spark a lot. Because we're going to be, you know, what was it about the 70s? We're going to talk to Dennis Hayes
Yes,
next.
right.
What was it about the 70s? We passed all the legislation that we're still living with now. And trying to peel back. We just had the fire.
We had the fire. I think the fire might be at sometimes sort of latent. It has to be poked, if you will, to sort of stir it up. And I see that coming about. And I think this summit has re-energized us and called to our attention that we have to be recommitted if we are to be responsible citizens, not only taking care of those invaluable, irreplaceable resources that we inherit, but all of us share a common responsibility for the air that we all breathe, the water that we drink, but occasionally we have to be reminded to get off our duff and do what has to be done.
I think the millennials have it. They have the knowledge because this generation has been educated.
Yes.
It started
That's
in
true.
these days. And I think they have it. They have to first be able to pay for college and
Yes.
get a job. So they have some problems.
Yeah.
But I think they will be our army for the future.
Yeah, that's good.
Bob, thank you.
Well, thank you, Bill.
It's so good to see you.
Okay, good. Thank you very much.
Keep it up.
Thank you.
You will lead it.